Now, verse 20. So he said, "Oh, you're advancing. What you're doing for me is more now than it used to be," which is the opposite of Ephesus. They were doing less than they used to. So it's really positive so far. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. You allow that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, to teach and seduce my servants to commit sexual immorality. Let's just simplify. What was she doing? She's saying, it's okay. You can be like everybody else. They all live together before they're married. Kind of a good way to figure out if you're going to make it in your marriage. And besides that, you have so many, pent-up frustrations. It's okay. She says, it's okay to commit the most frequently listed sin in the New Testament. Did you know there are 21 sin lists? Like Romans 1. Romans 1 is a sin list. There are lots of them. Jesus gives the list of, out of the human heart proceed evil thoughts and blah, 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 all these lists. Did you know in every list, sexual immorality is either the number one, first listed sin, or it's the number two. You see, we are sexually wired by God, and Satan knows that. Do you remember Christ's temptation? What was Christ's temptation? The devil said, you should command those stones to be made into bread. What was the temptation about that? Is anything wrong with bread? Mm-mm. What's it wrong? It's to fulfill a legitimate desire. What legitimate desire did Jesus have after 40 days in the wilderness? He was hungry. Is it good to be hungry? Yeah, we were wired to be hungry. Fulfill a legitimate desire, hunger in an illegitimate way, turn stones into bread. In other words, use your superpowers, your supernatural powers, go poof, and make stones into bread. Jesus wasn't supposed to show off. He was supposed to have people be convicted to come to him, not by him, calling down fire from heaven and jumping off high buildings and landing. Can you imagine how spectacular his ministry would have been if he was parachuting in and, walking through walls kind of like the Avengers, just do it. No. So what was the temptation? To fulfill a legitimate desire or need in an illegitimate way. What is this? Sexual desire is legitimate. Immorality is fulfilling it in an illegitimate way. See, she was saying, don't follow God's rules. Don't discipline yourself. Act like the world. Can you imagine if you did your sports only wearing olive oil and you went to the public baths to wash off the olive oil and there were young ladies there if you were a young man athlete? Can you imagine? Yeah, that was the ancient world. And this Bible study leader, Jezebel, who said, I speak for God, says, you can just act like the world, you're forgiven. So is there what we're talking about is, does it matter if you can get away with secret sin? Does it matter? Because you're already forgiven. Remember, I already said that Jesus already, on the cross, already paid for all the sins, so why not just add a little bit more to the pile? See? Isn't that a great Bible study topic? And not only act like the world, to eat things sacrificed to idols. You see, their banquets were revelrous. In Thyatira, when Sir William Ramsay excavated that town, he found that they used to go to these banquets, the normal people, the working people. When they had lunch lasted 2 hours, you laid on a couch with a little serving table in front of you, and you were served and entertained by the men were entertained and served by slave women, girls. And they would be drinking and eating meat offered to these idols, and they would worship, and it just became interchangeable that you were banqueting and committing immorality. So in other words, what she was saying is, act like the world, live like the world. And I gave her time to repent of her sexual immorality, and she didn't repent. Well, here's the first lesson. Are you quenching God? Jesus knows who's influencing your life, whether they are challenging you to sanctification. Be useful to God. Don't sin against him. Or if they're feeding your flesh, as in this text, seducing you to commit and to eat, what does that do if we're not being sanctified, if we're being seduced to disobey the Lord? 1 Thessalonians 5:19, one of the most sobering verses in the Bible. You know what it says? Quench not the spirit. The word quench is sabaomai in Greek. You know what sabaomai means? It means you got a nice little campfire here. In fact, where we're staying is one of the campfire spots. I guess it's over there, and there are benches around it, and there's even wood stacked up and a little fire pit. Just think, you're having a nice little campfire, and someone comes out with one of those great big tubs of water and ice and dumps it on there, and it goes, fire goes out, gets that gray acrid smoke. That's the picture of when we deny our usefulness to God and we are allowing Satan and our flesh and the world around us to seduce us, to commit and live and act like the world, it quenches the Lord. First, it grieves him. It grieves him that we're even listening to all this. But when we participate, it quenches. Well, so here's the problem. These people in Thyatira, sin was everywhere. If you worked a job in Thyatira, you had to be a union member. Unions are not new. Unions have been around since, they were called guilds in the old days, G-U-I-L-D. And so everybody, if you were a bricklayer, were in the bricklayer guild. If you were a pot maker, you were in the pot making guild. If you were an artist, you were in the artist guild. Every guild in Thyatira, Ramsey found as he excavated this, had a patron deity. And so you would come to lunch in your union hall, your guild, and you would have the idol there, and the dancing girls would come out with the wine, and then the serving ones, the slave girls, would come out with all the meat that had already been offered to that god, and they would, Ramsey said, this was his conclusion, he said, living in Thyatira in the first century was like living in a cesspool of sin. You know what a cesspool is? Septic tank. When you flush the toilet where it ends up. That's what Thyatira was like. Yet there was a church there, and the church was, your works are more now than they were at the beginning. So there was a church struggling against sin and serving Christ. And in the midst of that church were some who weren't struggling against sin.